The Eighth Amendment to the Constitution in Ireland is a total and complete ban on abortion. So they go very, very, very rigid with it. I think it's even in cases of the health of the mother and the life of the mother, they're like, no, it's a complete abortion ban. So there was a story about how, I think her name was Savita Halappanavar. We covered this story. This is going back to like 2012 or 2013. It was clear that she was going to miscarry. But instead of doing an abortion, they let everything happen naturally. And then I think she got, her bloodstream was filled with toxic something or other. I'm not a doctor. I have no clue exactly the terminology I should be using here. But she died. She died because she miscarried, and she didn't have to die. They could have aborted, right when she went to the hospital. But they let it all happen naturally, and as more time went by, she got sicker and sicker, and then she died. If they had done the abortion right when she got there, by the way, knowing that she was going to miscarry, then she would have been fine. She would have survived. So that sparked it was a huge national tragedy. Like I said, I covered it at the time, and, everybody was really angry about that because it shows that they're taking this religiously dogmatic position, and they were willing to literally sacrifice a human being to try to stay true to this bizarre religious dogma. And then the irony is, if you actually read the Bible's pro-abortion. So there's a part of the Bible, I believe it's in Numbers, where God says, basically, if your wife cheats on you, you have to give her, I think they call it bitter water, which is basically like a toxic potion where they drink it, and then if your wife has an abortion, miscarries after drinking the bitter water, well, then it's okay because that was the person she cheated on you with, so all's good. Now, if she drinks it and she doesn't miscarry / abort the baby, well, then that's your baby and it's all good. So that's God saying, basically, if your wife cheats on you, she should get an abortion. So even according to their own doctrines, that's in favor of abortion. Now, there are other parts that they use where they argue, no, it's against abortion. There's a passage about, I knew you before you were born, basically. But the counter argument I've heard to that one is God in the Bible is referring to a specific person with that passage. Like, oh, I knew you before you were born. Okay, but is that everybody? No, he's referring to a specific person at that point in the Bible. But either way, listen, man, why are we going to 1,000-year-old books to try to get public policy for today? I mean, that is utterly ridiculous. And that's what the backlash was and the outcry was after the death of Savita Halappanavar. So, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that name. But, so there was this national referendum that Ireland just had to maybe overturn the Eighth Amendment. So they said, everybody in the country, you get to vote directly on this issue. Should we overturn the total and complete ban on abortion? The results were overwhelming. 67% voted to repeal the provision. Only 33% voted to preserve it. By the way, in the 1980s, I believe it was 1983, when the Eighth Amendment passed in Ireland, it was 68% in favor of totally banning abortion. That totally flipped. Now it's 67% against a total abortion ban. Now, that doesn't mean that now abortion is legal in every single circumstance and, for any reason at any time whatsoever. No. What's going to happen is they'll come up with a new law or new laws that regulate it. That'll say, okay, after 12 weeks or after 20 weeks, there's no abortion after that, but here's the exceptions and here's the window where you can have an abortion. So basically, they're moving towards a more middle ground, regulated abortion position, kind of like the U.S. In the U.S., that's what we have. We have kind of like a middle ground. There was Roe versus Wade, which came up with the trimesters and basically said, hey, up to a certain point, it's a right, and then after that, the state can regulate it. So And each state obviously does it slightly differently. The liberal states are more lenient. The conservative states are more strict on it. But now it is at least allowed to some extent. So I think this is a giant win. And, it got me thinking a lot about this idea of direct democracy. And then it's something that's so obvious, it almost doesn't even cross your mind until you're slapped in the face with it. But imagine if we had in the U.S. National referendums, a national direct democracy on just say, maybe 5 issues per year. So once a year, everybody in the country can vote on whatever the 5 most important issues are of the year. Do you realize, that alone would allow us to basically circumvent what at this point is an obvious oligarchy. All the studies point to the same conclusion of whoever raises the most money as a politician in the U.S. is more likely to win, 93% of the time for Congress. So that means that our politicians are beholden to special interests. So it's a government of, by, and for the rich, of, by, and for the corporations. Well, one of the ways to get around that is to have national referendum votes. Now, I'm not saying it's easy to do that on every little issue, because there's actually a lot of boring work that the government does, whether it's like naming a fucking highway or all shit like that, they have to do. So I'm not saying we should all, oh my goodness, on every single little detail, we can all do a national referendum. But if you just take the 5 most important issues of the year and do a vote each year on that, are you fucking kidding me? Our country, we would be so much better off. We would already be decades in the future. Because if we had a national referendum on Medicare for all, people would vote yes. If we had a national referendum on legalizing marijuana, the American people would vote yes. If we had a national referendum on universal background checks for gun purchases, the American people would vote yes. Now, I'm not saying that a direct democracy in every instance makes sense, because listen, there was a time in U.S. history where if you had a direct vote among the American people on whether or not we should still have segregation, for a very long time in American history, segregation would have won. Now, I know that people like to look through rose-colored glasses and go back and go, no, that can't be true. It is true. It's 100% true. Segregation would have crushed in a national referendum poll at a certain point. So I'm not saying direct democracy is the answer in every circumstance. In fact, it most certainly is not. But my response to that is, that's why we have a constitution. So the whole idea of a constitution is, these are the issues that are off the table. These are the issues that are supposed to be non-negotiable under any circumstance. So the idea of freedom of speech, the idea of, freedom of religion, due process, all these things, protection from cruel and unusual punishment. The whole idea of these things is, okay, we can have disagreements and tweak the law in other ways, but on these core issues, we are not ever going back on this. Now, it's frustrating because oftentimes in the U.S., with stuff like the Patriot Act, they do basically ignore the Constitution, which is just absolutely infuriating. But the idea, at least in theory, is these are the non-negotiables. So as long as you have a good Constitution with non-negotiables and you put that off the table, I can't come up with any reason in my own mind where it's not, the preferable situation is not that after you get your Constitution, then you do have some version of direct democracy where the people decide the future and which policies should be implemented. So I really like that idea. Maybe it's time to promote some sort of legislation to that effect. The idea of there's a national referendum where you get to vote on the 5 biggest issues every year, and then that gets implemented into law. There's no way that the results would be as bad as what we have now in the country with our totally bought and owned government. Even if you're not in favor of even if you think, oh my goodness, what happens when they make the wrong decision? Whatever decisions would be made in national referendum votes, you have to concede would be less bad than what our government is doing to us right now. See, that's the thing. Even if it on a lot of issues, it's like, oh shit, they went the wrong way on that one. If you take a step back and look at the macro picture, there's no way that with direct ballot initiatives at the national level that overall the people would decide worse than the politicians are right now. So I think we should definitely do that, man. And I love what Ireland did here. It's just such a great way to determine what policies should be implemented. Like, ask the people of the country. Can't get any more straightforward and can't come up with a more common sense position than that.